Welcome to lesson number 81. Today we are going to talk about the human diseases. Let us start by defining the term disease. A disease is a disordered state of a tissue, organ system, or an organism during which it cannot perform its functions normally. Let's take, for example, the blood tissue. The blood tissue is a very important tissue in the body of an animal because it is supposed to ensure that oxygen and nutrients are reaching all the other parts of the body. Let us talk of oxygen supply. If blood cannot be able to supply oxygen to all other parts of the body, for example, in that process of transporting blood, it only takes some small amount just because the red blood cells are reduced in number, or maybe there are some red blood cells which are having some shape which do not enable them to supply blood, then we may be suspecting that individual to be suffering from a disease such as sickle cell anemia. In sickle cell anemia, the red blood cells are having a sickle shape instead of having the biconcave shape. Hence, they cannot be able to transport enough oxygen. Another example of a disordered tissue, still about blood, if blood cannot be able to facilitate the process of clotting in case of an injury of a tissue, then that is also a disordered state, and therefore that condition is referred to as hemophilia, and the patient is called hemophiliac. There are several examples, but I'm just going to list some few examples of disordered state of the tissues and organs. Another example of tissue is the skeletal tissue. Skeletal tissue is actually the skeleton framework in the body, and its major function actually is to support the body off the ground. Therefore, the skeletal tissue needs to be stronger enough and provide that rigid framework to enable the body to be supported off the ground. In some cases whereby you're finding that the tissues of the skeletal tissue of an animal, for example, the skeletal tissue of a human being, contains some perforations in them, some small holes in them, which make them to be a bit weaker instead of being strong as required, then that leads to a condition, or a disease rather, which is referred to as osteoporosis. That is whereby the bones have become perforated, hence there are some small holes found on them, making them to be weaker. What is that? It is a disordered state of the tissue, which is called skeleton tissue. It has led to a disease. There is also a certain organ in the body called the pancreas. One of the functions of the pancreas is to secrete a certain hormone called insulin hormone. The function of insulin hormone is to convert excess blood sugar into glycogen so that it can be stored in the liver and in the muscles. But in case the insulin is not produced by that pancreas, remember, it is a disordered state of the pancreas that is failing to produce insulin, or maybe producing an insufficient amount of insulin. That leads to a disease called diabetes mellitus. And lastly, let me talk about an organ and organ system which is not functioning normally, which is leading to a certain disease. Let us talk of an example of organ system such as the digestive system. The digestive system is an organ system which comprises of organs such as the tongue, esophagus, small intestine, stomach, and the large intestine. If there is any part that is not performing its role as required, it may lead to a certain disease. Let's take an example of the large intestine and the small intestine, where there is absorption of water. If there are some worms or some microorganisms which have invaded the lumen of the small or the large intestine, so that there is no absorption of water and nutrients, then it means that there is a disordered state. Then the water may not be absorbed into the tissues, and even the nutrients may also not be absorbed into the tissues, especially for the case of the small intestines. If that is the case, then an individual may have too much water mixed up with the fecal discharge. Hence, when the fecal discharge has been eliminated out of the body, in addition to too much water, then it leads to some watery fecal discharge called diarrhea. And therefore, there is also another state in which the organ system is not performing normally, or a specific part of the organ is not as performing its role as required, that leads to a disease. Now, having understood all that, we need to know that in human beings, the causes of diseases may be categorized into three. One, nutritional deficiency. Nutritional deficiency is whereby there are some nutrients which an individual is lacking in his or her biological system. For example, an individual eats some food which do not have enough vitamin C. Then that person ends up suffering from a disease called scurvy. An individual may fail to get some nutrients such as vitamin A in the diet. That person is likely to suffer from a disease called night blindness. If he is lacking vitamin D in the body, then he may be suffering from a disease characterized by weak bones, which is called rickets. The second major cause of human diseases is the genetic disorders. Here, these are diseases which are associated with some abnormalities which are inherited from the parents to the offsprings. An example of a genetic disease is diabetes. Remember, the diabetes mellitus is whereby the pancreas is not capable of producing insulin, or it produces insufficient quantity of insulin hormone. Therefore, this may lead to these genes which are responsible for formation of a pancreas which is not capable of producing enough insulin, can be passed to the offspring during the process of fertilization, and as a result, an offspring comes out with similar characteristics to those of the parents. Therefore, this disease is referred to as a genetic disease because an offspring has just inherited it from the parents. The last cause of human diseases, and that is what we are going to measure on today, is microorganisms such as bacteria, viruses, and fungi. Microorganisms such as bacteria, viruses, and fungi, in addition to protozoan parasites, are the major causes of most of the diseases that we are going to discuss today. Therefore, I want you to keep in mind that we'll be talking about bacterial diseases. Those are the diseases that are caused by the bacteria. We'll also be talking about the protozoan diseases. Those are the diseases caused by the protozoan parasites. And lastly, we'll be talking about the diseases which are caused by the parasitic worms, such as the roundworms, Ascaris lumbricoids, among others. That marks the end of our lesson for today, introducing the human diseases. So let's meet in our 82nd lesson, whereby I'll be talking about the bacterial diseases. Thank you for watching the video. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe to my channel. Bye.